You might not have heard a lot about Enlisted, but if you have, it's probably come from a number of big YouTubers who've been touting it as a COD or Battlefield killer. Now that is saying something. Could it really rival some of the industry's first-person shooter titans? While it actually looks surprisingly good, you've got to admit that isn't enough by itself to compete, and it would take a hell of a lot to dethrone Battlefield or Call of Duty. So the question becomes, does it come anywhere close, and is it actually worth a try? So the basic premise we've seen before, you drop into the heart of some of World War II's biggest battles. That's nothing new, and there's been some classic games made out of the World War II setting. However, where Enlisted is unique is that you control squads of AI soldiers through these different large-scale game modes. The concept sounds quite interesting, and it's what prompted me to give it a try. And I'm not disputing the fact that it has an interesting premise. Unfortunately, it falls at every hurdle while trying to deliver on that. There's no denying that some people are going to love it, and at the end of the day, this is just my opinion. But Enlisted is something that you shouldn't waste any time on. So what is it that makes Enlisted so bad? Well, it sells itself as an MMO squad-based shooter. Now that's not something you're likely to have heard of before. I know I hadn't. But as a result, Enlisted lives and dies on the quality of its action, its gameplay, and those key MMO elements. After all, it's not from a AAA developer, so we can't hold its graphics, sound mixing, voiceover to the same standards as Battlefield and Call of Duty. But if the gameplay's good enough, all of that doesn't really matter. If a game's fun, if it's easy to pick up and play, and it'll entice people to keep coming back, that's what's important. But in terms of what it's actually like to pick up and play, some adjectives that come to mind are old-fashioned, boring, clunky, and unresponsive. They're not exactly words that get you excited to play a game, and that's just because you really shouldn't be playing Enlisted. If I'm being totally honest, gameplay would feel average on the PS2. The first thing you'll notice is the clunky and buggy movement. Your player character can be facing one way only to be looking in the exact opposite direction a moment later for no reason at all. I was playing the game on the PS5, so there's every chance the game may control a little better on PC, or so you might hope. The issue is that even when the movement does work, the animations are incredibly dated, and they really don't feel all that authentic. As a result, navigating the sprawling maps in Enlisted is a dizzying experience. On top of that, the shooting, the main thing you actually do in FPS games, also feels aged and incredibly unsatisfying. Whether it's the lack of recoil with the guns, hit and miss sound design, dodgy aiming controls, especially on the snipers, or absence of advanced shooting mechanics like bullet drop, Enlisted just can't compete with modern shooters. It feels like one of the original Call of Duty games. And all this could be forgiven if it wasn't striving for a realistic feel. But it is, and immersion is key to achieving that. So I mentioned before that the USP of Enlisted is its MMO component, and that comes in the form of the naming, levelling and upgrading of individual members of your squads. It's a pretty tedious affair unfortunately, with unlocks and progression being specific to each individual soldier. That even includes things like the ability to have a sidearm. It all just makes the game painfully grindy, something that isn't helped by the much easier pay to win option. I'll come back to that later, it's one of Enlisted's biggest downsides. That said, the squad-based gameplay is perhaps the most disappointing thing about Enlisted. The AI that controls the members of your squad is just painfully stupid. As teammates, they're borderline useless. I don't think they revive me a single time, even though they appear to have the ability to. And as enemies, they either clump together in tight spaces, so it's like shooting fish in a barrel, or they walk out in the open, aiming at the sky. Weirdly, there's very little you can actually do with your squad too. Either point at a position and order them to defend it, or swap to one of them if they're somehow still alive after you die. Of course, if they aren't leveled up like your squad leader, they're borderline useless by comparison anyway. Like Battlefield, Enlisted also includes tanks and planes, and it's a nice addition. They provide a bit of much needed variety to the repetitive gameplay, and the vehicles do help with traversing the massive maps, but they really aren't enough to make a significant difference to what is overall pretty boring and old-fashioned gameplay. Stylistically speaking, Enlisted does nothing new to justify its existence either. it just plays like it's trying to be a Battlefield ripoff. And if its unique gameplay ideas actually made it worth playing, that wouldn't be an entirely bad thing. But without that, it just comes across as a poor man's imitation. And while graphically it looks pretty good, especially for a game that's not from a AAA developer, it's just not enough. Likewise, the music and atmosphere in Enlisted is like something from a PS2 Call of Duty title. If you were hoping for a more realistic and gritty tone akin to World at War, forget it. Enlisted is everything you've seen and heard a million times before. Although, I suppose that does kind of suit the toy soldiers vibe you get from the zombie-like AI.
You understand what I'm talking about, Vic?
Oh, yeah, because I remember that.
The key thing I need to emphasise though is that Enlisted is free. This means that of course there's going to be a microtransaction element to provide a source of revenue for the developers. And while microtransactions get a lot of flack these days, ultimately there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, let's face it, Call of Duty peddles useless and frustratingly annoying skins all the time. But in complementing the extreme grind of Enlisted's progression system, pay to win is at its zenith. Enlisted contains multiple types of in-game currency that are used to unlock weapons, upgrades, equipment and abilities for your soldiers and squads. The currency you use for each varies, which, like the poorly designed menus, make it incredibly confusing. Completing different in-game challenges and simply playing the game are the default methods for acquiring currency, but it takes a long time, and when you consider that soldiers progress individually, the true scope of Enlisted's grind comes into view. This means there's a huge incentive for players to invest their hard-earned money into buying in-game currency that they can spend speeding up their progression and giving the game some much-needed variety. It's a shame because even if you are enticed by the gameplay, it means that you won't be competitive because anyone who's actually paid real money will simply have the better guns and equipment. So if you're a casual player who's just looking for something fun to pick up and play, Enlisted probably isn't going to be for you. So where has the rumour come from that it's a Battlefield or Call of Duty killer? Like I said, some big YouTubers have made videos about it, but if you look a little closer, I think what you're seeing is paid marketing. I just won't have it that anyone actually thinks this is as good as Battlefield. And I think now that Battlefield 5 is free to PlayStation Plus users, Enlisted is going to have a really hard time selling itself. I mean, it's inferior on every front, so why would anyone choose to pick up Enlisted? Ultimately, it's been marketed as a next-gen shooter with a unique concept that sets it apart from its competitors in an already crowded genre. But as a next-gen title, it fails, and its concept doesn't prop it up. The PS5 version, for example, doesn't even utilise the DualSense controller, which is just really disappointing. And like I said, its appealing concept is just poorly utilised, and its generic tone fails to help it stand out. On top of all that, you've got a brutal grind combined with blatant pay-to-win mechanics. It's just not a winning formula. The only time I would have recommended it is if you're after a good-looking first-person shooter but don't want to pay the premium price tag Call of Duty or Battlefield. But when Warzone is free to play and Battlefield is available on the PlayStation Store at no additional cost for PlayStation Plus users, what reason is there to give Enlisted a go? Take it from me, Enlisted is just pointless. If you enjoyed the video, or even if you disagreed, drop us a like or a comment and don't forget to subscribe.